Carrie wasn't just a horror classic, it was a production that literally injured its cast. Sissy Spacek was buried alive by her husband, while PJ Soles had her eardrum ruptured by a fire hose. Betty Buckley slapped Nancy Allen 30 times for the perfect take. And Spielberg hit on every actress until finding his future wife. Here are 15 weird and surprising facts about Carrie. Fact 1. PJ Soles wasn't acting when her character Norma got blasted with a fire hose during the Prom massacre. The water pressure actually ruptured her eardrum and knocked her unconscious. The injury was so severe, she lost all hearing in that ear for 6 months. The scene required Norma to be hit full force with an industrial fire hose, the kind firefighters use to put out building fires. The professional fireman operating the hose refused to do it at full pressure because he knew it was dangerously powerful. So the stunt coordinator took over and just started whacking the hose around without proper control. The high-pressure water blast went directly into Sole's ear canal and burst her eardrum instantly. She fainted immediately from the pain and loss of equilibrium, which is controlled by the inner ear. When her head rolls to the side and she collapses onto the table in the finished film, that's not acting. That's real unconsciousness from a real injury. The crew initially thought she was just giving a great performance. When she didn't get up after the director yelled cut, they realized something was seriously wrong. Soles was rushed to the hospital where doctors confirmed the ruptured eardrum. Brian De Palma kept the shot in the movie because it looked so authentic. Fact 2. The prom scene took 3 full days to film, and Sissy Spacek refused to wash off the fake blood between shooting days. She went home every night covered head to toe in sticky corn syrup and red food coloring, slept in it, and returned to set the next morning still wearing her blood-soaked costume. The decision was made for continuity purposes. The prom massacre sequence was shot out of order with multiple camera angles, and Spacek wanted the blood pattern on her dress and skin to match perfectly across all 3 days of filming. The only way to ensure that was to never wash it off. Director Brian De Palma later said the smell became unbearable. The fake blood was made from corn syrup mixed with red food coloring, and after sitting on Spacek's skin and clothes under hot studio lights for 3 days, it started fermenting. De Palma described the smell as gummy candy that had been sitting on a radiator, sweet but rotten at the same time. Spacek's trailer was parked directly behind the set so she could rest between takes without having to walk through the studio covered in blood. But cast and crew members said you could smell her coming from 20 feet away by day 3.
10 minutes left. Stick 'em up your...
Betty Buckley had to genuinely slap Nancy Allen's face as hard as she could, over and over, until Brian De Palma finally got the authentic reaction he wanted. Different accounts put the number between 12 and 30 slaps, but everyone agrees it was a lot of real, full-force hits. The scene where gym teacher Miss Collins confronts bully Chris Hargensen required Chris to look genuinely shocked and hurt by the slap. De Palma refused to accept a fake stage slap. He wanted Allen's face to actually sting so her reaction would be real, so he had Buckley do it for real, take after take. Allen's face was bright red and swollen by the time they finished. Buckley felt terrible about it and kept apologizing between takes, but De Palma kept demanding more. He was notorious for his perfectionism and wouldn't settle for anything less than the exact emotional beat he wanted. This was standard practice for De Palma, who believed authentic reactions created better performances. But by modern standards, what happened to Allen would be considered unacceptable on set. Actors' unions have since implemented rules specifically to prevent this kind of treatment during physical scenes. Fact 4. The famous jump scare ending where Carrie's bloody hand shoots out of the grave wasn't done with a stunt double. Sissy Spacek insisted on doing it herself, so the crew had to bury her alive in a box underground, and her husband Jack Fisk, who was the film's production designer, was the one who buried her. Spacek was placed in a wooden box and positioned beneath rocks, dirt, and gravel at the location of Carrie's burned-down house. Only her arm was exposed, ready to shoot up and grab Amy Irving's wrist in the nightmare sequence. Brian De Palma tried to talk her out of it, saying they'd just use a stunt person's hand, but Spacek insisted it had to be her own hand for authenticity. De Palma later explained his reluctance in interviews. He said, "We had to bury her and stick her underneath the ground. Well, I had her husband Fisk bury her because I certainly didn't want to bury her." De Palma was legitimately worried something would go wrong and Spacek would be injured or worse. The scene was shot relatively quickly because everyone was nervous about keeping Spacek underground for too long. Fact 5.
I'd like to contribute $10.
Stephen King was paid a mere $2,500 for the film rights to Carrie, his first published novel. In today's money, that's roughly $14,000, a tiny fraction of what the film eventually earned. Carrie grossed $33.8 million at the box office on a budget of just $1.8 million, making it one of the most profitable horror films of the 1970s. King was only 26 years old in 1975 when he sold the rights, working as a high school teacher for $160 an hour and supplementing his income by selling short stories. At the time, he had absolutely no negotiating power. Multiple studios were considering buying Carrie, but King had no track record and no leverage. The $2,500 payment was standard for an unknown first-time author with 0 film credits. In a 2010 interview, King said he had no regrets about taking such a low payment. He called himself fortunate to have that happen to my first book because the film's success made him a household name and dramatically increased his value for future adaptations. Without the Carrie movie, King might have remained a struggling teacher who wrote in his spare time. Fact 6.
Okay, line up. Line up!
Directors Brian De Palma and George Lucas were close friends, and they decided to hold joint casting sessions for Carrie and Star Wars simultaneously. Hundreds of young actors came through, auditioning for both projects at the same time in the same room. Both directors watched together and picked which actors they wanted. Amy Irving came extremely close to landing the role of Princess Leia instead of Carrie Fisher. Irving has since said that De Palma helped her prepare for her Star Wars screen test, but ultimately Lucas chose Fisher. William Catt, who played Tommy Ross in Carrie, originally auditioned for Luke Skywalker. You can still find his Star Wars audition footage on YouTube. PJ Soles, Carrie Fisher, and dozens of other actresses all read for both films during these joint sessions. It was an unusual arrangement, but it saved both directors time and allowed them to see a massive pool of talent quickly. The joint auditions meant that essentially the entire young Hollywood talent pool of 1976 was being evaluated simultaneously for 2 films that would both become cultural phenomena. If you were a young actor in Los Angeles in late 1975, you probably auditioned for Carrie, Star Wars, or both. Fact 7.
Don't be in such a hurry.
Steven Spielberg was a frequent visitor to the Carrie set after Brian De Palma invited him, telling Spielberg there were a lot of cute girls in his cast. According to PJ Soles, Spielberg asked out most of the women working on the film, including her. Amy Irving was the only one who said yes. Spielberg and Irving began dating during Carrie's production in 1976. Their relationship was intense but turbulent. They broke up and got back together multiple times over nearly a decade. When they split in 1980, Spielberg revoked the role of Marion Ravenwood in Raiders of the Lost Ark, which he'd promised to Irving. The part went to Karen Allen instead. They eventually reunited in 1984 and married in 1985. Irving later said she has a thing for directors and that her entire romantic history consists of dating and marrying directors. The marriage lasted 4 years before ending in 1989, reportedly because Spielberg was having an affair. Irving received an estimated $100 million divorce settlement after a judge controversially threw out a prenuptial agreement that had been written on a napkin. Fact 8.
Pollock, Shires, Snell.
To authentically portray Carrie's loneliness and isolation, Sissy Spacek deliberately avoided socializing with any of the other actors throughout the entire production. She would hide in her trailer between takes, stay in corners by herself on set, and refuse to engage in friendly conversation with her castmates. Before filming began, Spacek warned everyone what she was doing, so they wouldn't take it personally. She told them, "I love you all, but I have to avoid you to stay in character. We'll have so much fun together after filming wraps." The cast understood and respected her method, though it created an eerie atmosphere on set. Spacek took her isolation even further by decorating her trailer with religious iconography, including a Gustave Doré illustrated Bible. She studied the body language of people being stoned to death for their sins in biblical artwork and made sure to begin or end every scene in one of those tortured positions. The dedication paid off. SpaceX's performance earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, making her one of the very few actors ever nominated for a horror film role. Fact 9.
Won't you come in, Mrs. White?
Oh, how kind of you.
Piper Laurie found the script so over the top and ridiculous that she genuinely believed Carrie was supposed to be a dark comedy. She kept bursting into laughter between takes because she thought her religious fanatic character and wardrobe were intentionally absurd and funny. Brian De Palma had to pull her aside and explain it was actually a serious horror film. Laurie couldn't take her dialogue seriously. Lines like locking Carrie in a prayer closet and ranting about sin seemed so extreme that Laurie thought they were meant to be satirical. She approached the role with tongue-in-cheek energy, playing Margaret White as if she were a parody of religious extremism. It turns out Laurie's misinterpretation worked perfectly. Her performance has an unsettling manic quality that makes Margaret White terrifying precisely because she seems unhinged and unpredictable. If Laurie had played the character completely straight and serious, Margaret might have come across as one-dimensional. Instead, her slightly comedic energy makes the character feel dangerously unstable. Laurie's performance earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress, the second acting nomination for Carrie, making it one of the rare horror films to receive multiple Oscar nods. Fact 10.
Tommy and all the others gone. It's best we just go away for a while.
The entire final sequence where Amy Irving walks up to Carrie's grave and places flowers was shot with Irving walking backwards, then played in reverse to create a surreal, dreamlike quality. That's why the scene feels slightly off. Cars in the background appear to drive in reverse, and birds fly backwards if you watch closely. Brian De Palma was directly inspired by the final scene in Deliverance, which used the same technique. He wanted Sue Snell's nightmare to feel unreal and unsettling, like the audience couldn't quite trust what they were seeing. The technique worked brilliantly for the jump scare, because the whole sequence feels subtly wrong and dreamlike. Viewers are already on edge before Carrie's hand shoots out of the rubble. The jump scare itself became one of the most famous in horror history. It was directly copied in Friday the 13th and has been referenced or parodied in countless films since. When Sissy Spacek attended theatrical screenings in New York after release, she said she would sneak in just for the final 5 minutes to watch audiences jump out of their seats. Fact 11.
And it was weak and loosed the raven on the world. And the raven was called sin.
Piper Laurie's character Margaret White constantly quotes the Bible to justify her abuse of Carrie, but none of the passages she cites actually say what she claims they say. The filmmakers deliberately invented fake Bible verses to show how Margaret twists religion to suit her delusions. For example, Margaret quotes Genesis chapter 3 to declare that sexuality is inherently evil and sinful. In reality, Genesis 3 is the story of Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit from the tree of knowledge. It has nothing to do with the specific sexual condemnations Margaret claims. Throughout the film, Margaret rattles off verse numbers and dire warnings that sound biblical but are completely fabricated. The choice was intentional. It reveals Margaret as someone who doesn't actually understand the Bible, but uses fragments of religious language to terrorize her daughter and justify her own paranoia. This detail adds another layer to Margaret's character. She's not a true believer with a twisted interpretation of Scripture. She's someone who weaponizes the appearance of religion without any actual theological foundation. She's making it all up as she goes, which makes her even more dangerous and unpredictable than if she were following a real fundamentalist doctrine. Fact 12.
Trust me, Carrie. You can trust me. Trust me, Carrie.
The iconic prom sequence took more than 2 weeks to film and required a total of 35 complete takes. Every element had to be perfectly choreographed. The slow motion romance, the bucket drop, the fire and destruction. Getting all the pieces to work together took an enormous amount of time and patience. The famous spinning shot of Carrie and Tommy Ross dancing was achieved by placing Sissy Spacek and William Katt on a rotating platform that spun in one direction while the camera dolly tracked in the opposite direction. This created a disorienting, dreamlike effect that makes Carrie's brief moment of happiness feel unreal and fragile. Brian De Palma originally used extensive split-screen effects throughout the Prom massacre, showing multiple multiple perspectives simultaneously. But after reviewing the footage, De Palma was disappointed with how it looked. He re-edited most of the scenes into standard full-frame shots, keeping only a few split-screen moments that he felt actually enhanced the chaos. The corn syrup blood used for the bucket dump had to be precisely temperature controlled so it would flow convincingly on camera. If it was too cold, it would be too thick. If it was too warm, it would be too runny. Fact 13.
I know. Do you want to decline?
In real life, Sissy Spacek was voted homecoming queen at her high school, making her the exact opposite of the bullied outcast she played in Carrie. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved in production. They'd cast one of the popular girls to play the ultimate unpopular girl. Spacek had to completely transform herself to land the role. Brian De Palma's first choice was actually Amy Irving, who better fit his vision of mousy, awkward Carrie. But Spacek's husband, Jack Fisk, who was the film's production designer, convinced De Palma to at least let Spacek audition. For her screen test, Spacek deliberately made herself look as unattractive as possible. She rubbed Vaseline into her hair to make it greasy, didn't wash her face or brush her teeth, and wore a sailor dress her mother had made for her in 7th grade with the hem cut off so she'd look dorky and childish. The transformation worked. Spacek's audition was so convincing that De Palma gave her the lead role and moved Amy Irving to the smaller part of Sue Snell. Spacek's ability to tap into vulnerability despite her own popular background proved she had the acting range to make Carrie believable. Fact 14.
Energy, Norma! Come on! 8, 2, 3, 4.
Carrie. The musical opened on Broadway in 1988 and became one of the most legendary theatrical disasters in history. The show closed after only 16 previews and 5 official performances, losing millions of dollars and becoming synonymous with spectacular failure. The musical featured over-the-top staging, including flying gymnasts, elaborate special effects, and musical numbers that critics called aggressively terrible. Reviews were savage. Frank Rich of the New York Times wrote that it was stupefyingly, fabulously terrible, and a metaphor for everything that's wrong with Broadway. Interestingly, Betty Buckley, who played gym teacher Miss Collins in the 1976 film, won the role of Margaret White in the musical. She was one of the few elements critics praised, calling her performance too good for this material. Despite its original failure, Carrie, the musical, has since gained a substantial cult following. The show has been revived multiple times in smaller productions, and the notorious original staging is now considered campy fun rather than artistic tragedy. Cast albums sell for high prices on eBay, and theater students study it as a cautionary tale about spectacle over substance. Fact 15. Stephen King has publicly stated that he thinks Brian De Palma's ending for Carrie is better than the ending he wrote in his novel. This is rare. Authors typically hate when films change their work, but King genuinely believed the movie improved on his original vision. In King's novel, the ending is more sprawling and apocalyptic, with Carrie's powers causing wider destruction across the town. The film condensed everything to the prom and the White House, making it more focused and intimate. King felt this tighter structure worked better cinematically. The jump scare ending with Carrie's hand shooting from the grave was also a film invention. King's novel doesn't have that moment. When King first saw the movie at a sneak preview on Halloween night 1976 in Boston, he was seated in a mostly black audience that had come to watch the Red Fox comedy that was playing as the other half of a double feature. King later said he knew Carrie would be a hit when he saw 2 large men sitting near him jump out of their seats and clutch each other during the final scare. So there you have it, 15 weird and surprising facts about Carrie. From ruptured eardrums to actresses sleeping in dried blood, this horror classic was just as intense behind the scenes as it was on screen. If you learned something new today, hit that like button and subscribe for more movie facts. Drop a comment telling me which fact shocked you the most.